My most terrifying night shift at the old nuclear plant happened in March of 2000. And even now, 25 years later, I still wake up drenched in sweat, hearing those sounds. I'm Viktor Sokolov, and back then, I was just a 28-year-old security guard trying to make ends meet in post-Soviet Ukraine. The pay was decent, the work was easy, and most importantly, nobody asked too many questions. Looking back, I should have asked more questions myself. The Chernobyl exclusion zone had become almost routine by then. 14 years had passed since the disaster, and the initial panic had given way to a strange kind of normalcy. Scientists came and went, bureaucrats inspected things, and guards like me kept watch over the ghost of what used to be the pride of Soviet engineering. Most shifts were boring, just walking through checkpoints, monitoring radiation levels, and making sure no looters or curious idiots tried to sneak past the perimeter. But that night, March 15th, 2000, was different from the moment I arrived. I remember driving up to the facility in my old Lada, the headlights cutting through the fog that had settled over the abandoned landscape. The trees looked skeletal in the darkness, their branches twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberately menacing. My supervisor, Dmitri, was supposed to brief me before his shift ended, but when I arrived at the guardhouse, he was already gone. In his place was a handwritten note taped to the desk. Victor, needed to leave early. Wife is sick. Your route is Sector 4 tonight. Stay in assigned areas. Don't deviate. Radio isn't working properly in the eastern wing. Should be fixed by morning. D. Something about that note bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Dimitri's handwriting looked rushed, almost panicked. And Sector 4? We rarely patrolled that deep into the facility anymore. It was one of the areas closest to Reactor 4, the sarcophagus that entombed the nuclear core. The radiation levels were technically safe with proper equipment, but nobody liked going there. It felt wrong in ways that had nothing to do with the Geiger counters we carried. I suited up anyway, checking my dosimeter 3 times before stepping out into the cold March night. The wind carried a metallic taste, something I'd never quite gotten used to despite months of working the zone. My flashlight beam seemed weaker than usual, swallowed by the overwhelming darkness of the abandoned complex. The main administration building loomed ahead, its broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at me. The first 2 hours passed without incident. I walked my route, checked the doors, noted my observations in the logbook. Everything was exactly as it should be, dead silent, utterly empty, frozen in time. But around midnight, as I was passing through the corridor leading to the control room anteroom, I heard it for the first time. A voice, distant, muffled, speaking Russian. I froze, my hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt before remembering Dimitri's note about it not working properly in this section. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "This is security. Identify yourself." Nothing. Just the wind howling through the broken windows and the steady drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. I told myself it was just the building settling, or perhaps my imagination playing tricks after too many energy drinks. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. It wasn't just one voice, it was multiple voices, overlapping, urgent. They seemed to be coming from deeper in the complex, from the direction of the sealed control rooms. My training said to report immediately and wait for backup. My curiosity, and perhaps my pride, made me move forward instead. I pulled out my flashlight and advanced down the corridor, my boots crunching on debris and broken glass. The voices grew louder, more distinct. I could make out words now. Pressure rising. We need to shut it down. Get Dyatlov on the phone. My blood ran cold. Those were phrases from the disaster, from that night in 1986 when everything went wrong. I reached the heavy steel door marked Control Room 4, Authorized Personnel Only. It was sealed with chains and a massive padlock, just as it had been every other time I'd patrolled this route. But the voices were coming from behind it, clear as day now. Men arguing, shouting, the sound of alarms blaring. It was impossible. This room had been empty for 14 years. Nobody could be in there. That's when my dosimeter started clicking. Slowly at first, then faster. The needle was climbing, the radiation level rising steadily even though I hadn't moved. I looked down at the device, watching the numbers increase beyond what should have been possible in this area. My hands started shaking. Something was very, very wrong. And then, through the gap beneath the sealed door, I saw light. A flickering, greenish glow that pulsed in rhythm with my accelerating heartbeat. The voices behind the door suddenly stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. In that moment of absolute quiet, I heard one more sound. Footsteps approaching the door from the other side, heavy and deliberate, stopping just inches from where I stood. Someone, or something, was standing on the other side of that sealed door, waiting. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and get the hell out of that building. But fear has a strange way of paralyzing you, rooting your feet to the ground, even as your mind is shrieking danger. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, staring at that sealed door while the greenish glow beneath it intensified. The footsteps on the other side had stopped, but I could feel a presence, something aware, something watching, waiting for me to make the next move. My dosimeter was going crazy now, the clicking so rapid it had become almost a continuous buzz. The numbers had climbed into the red zone, levels that shouldn't exist outside the sarcophagus itself. I needed to evacuate immediately, follow protocol, get to a safe distance. But as I stepped backward, my boot caught on something and I stumbled, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam rolled, casting wild shadows across the walls before settling at an angle that illuminated something I hadn't noticed before. There were wet footprints on the floor, leading away from the sealed door. Fresh footprints, still glistening in the flashlight beam, tracking down the corridor in the direction I'd just come from. That was impossible. I'd walked this exact route minutes ago, and the floor had been dry except for the occasional puddle from the leaking ceiling. These prints were new, and they weren't water. The liquid was thicker, darker, leaving a residue that looked disturbingly organic. I snatched up my flashlight and followed the trail with my beam, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The footprints led about 20 meters down the corridor before stopping abruptly in front of an open doorway. Not just any doorway, the entrance to the old medical station, a room I'd checked less than an hour ago and found locked. Now the door stood wide open, and from inside came a sound that made my skin crawl. Breathing. Slow, labored, rattling breaths, like someone struggling with damaged lungs. "Who's there?" I managed to call out, though my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "This is a restricted area. You need to identify yourself immediately." The breathing stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Then a voice, hoarse and strained, speaking in Russian with an accent I recognized as Ukrainian. "Help me, please. The radiation. It burns. Everything burns." Every hair on my body stood on end. That voice didn't sound right. It was too hollow, too empty, like an echo of speech rather than actual human vocalization. But it was also desperate, pleading. What if someone had actually broken into the zone? What if there was a real person in there, suffering, needing help? I'd heard stories of looters getting trapped, of homeless people seeking shelter in the abandoned buildings despite the danger. Against every screaming instinct of self-preservation, I moved toward the doorway. My dosimeter was still clicking wildly, but I'd become almost numb to it. I raised my flashlight and stepped through the entrance of the medical station. The room was exactly as I remembered from earlier. Examination tables overturned, cabinets ransacked years ago, medical equipment scattered across the floor. Except now, in the far corner, there was someone sitting in one of the old chairs. At first, I could only see a silhouette, a hunched figure in what looked like a radiation suit, the old Soviet-era kind they'd used during the initial cleanup. The suit was torn in places, hanging off the figure's frame. As my flashlight beam found him, I saw why. The person inside wasn't just injured, they were deteriorating. The skin visible through the tears in the suit was blistered, blackened, peeling away in sheets. I'd seen photographs of the acute radiation syndrome victims from 1986, the firefighters who'd been exposed to lethal doses. This looked exactly like those images. Jesus Christ, I breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. How long have you been here? We need to get you to a hospital, immediately. The figure's head snapped up with an unnatural speed, and I saw its face for the first time. What I'd thought were dark shadows were actually empty sockets, where eyes should have been. The mouth hung open, revealing teeth too white against the ruined flesh. And when it spoke again, I realized with mounting horror that the lips weren't moving. The voice was coming from somewhere else, somewhere inside the thing that wore the radiation suit like a grotesque costume. You shouldn't have come here, Victor, it said, and my blood turned to ice. I'd never given my name. I'd never identified myself. This place remembers. The walls remember. We all remember what happened that night, and now you're going to remember too. The figure stood up, and I saw that it was impossibly tall. Its spine twisted at angles that defied human anatomy. The radiation suit split further as it moved, revealing more of that blackened, weeping flesh underneath. But worse than its appearance was the smell that hit me. Not decay, but something chemical. Burning, like superheated metal and melting plastic. The smell of the disaster itself. I did run then. I turned and bolted from that medical station, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as my feet pounded against the concrete. Behind me, I heard that dragging sound again, faster now, accompanied by a clicking that matched the rhythm of my dosimeter. It was following me. Whatever that thing was, it was following me through the corridors of the abandoned facility. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, my lungs burning, my mind refusing to process what I'd just seen. I needed to reach the exit, get to my car, get help. But as I rounded a corner, I skidded to a halt. The corridor ahead was blocked. Not by debris or a collapsed ceiling, but by more of them. More figures in radiation suits, standing motionless in the darkness, their eyeless faces all turned toward me. I counted 5, then 7, then realized there were too many to count. They filled the hallway, silent and waiting. And behind me, getting closer, I heard that dragging sound and that hollow voice. There's nowhere to run, Victor. You're already contaminated. You're already one of us. You just don't know it yet. My dosimeter was screaming now, the needle buried deep in the red zone. And as I stood there, trapped between the impossible figures ahead and whatever was pursuing me from behind, I felt something warm trickling from my nose. I touched my upper lip, and my fingers came away dark with blood. The radiation was killing me, and I was still 4 hours away from sunrise. Panic does strange things to the human mind. In that moment, trapped between those figures and bleeding from my nose, something inside me broke through the fear. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was the training I'd received. Or maybe it was just sheer stubborn refusal to die in that godforsaken place. Whatever it was, it made me think, instead of freeze. The figures ahead weren't moving. They were just standing there, blocking the main corridor. But to my right, barely visible in the darkness, was a service passage. One of the narrow maintenance corridors that workers had used to move between sections. I'd explored it once during a daytime patrol. It was cramped, filled with pipes and electrical conduits, but it connected to the western stairwell. If I could reach those stairs, I could get to the ground floor and out through the auxiliary exit. I didn't give myself time to reconsider. I ducked into the service passage, my flashlight illuminating rusted pipes and peeling paint. The space was so narrow I had to turn sideways in places, my jacket scraping against the walls. Behind me, I heard a sound like a collective exhale, all those figures releasing breath simultaneously. Then came the footsteps, not dragging anymore, but running. They were all running now, converging on the service passage entrance. I pushed forward faster, ignoring the scrapes and bruises as I squeezed through the tight spaces. My dosimeter was still screaming, but the needle had started to drop slightly. Maybe I was moving away from whatever source was causing the spike, or maybe the device was malfunctioning. I didn't care. I just needed to keep moving, keep putting distance between myself and those things. The service passage seemed longer than I remembered, stretching endlessly into darkness. My flashlight caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there, handprints on the walls that glowed faintly green, dates scratched into the metal pipes, some from 1986, others from dates that hadn't happened yet. I was seeing things, I told myself. The radiation was affecting my brain, causing hallucinations. That had to be it. The alternative, that this place was somehow existing outside normal time, was too terrible to accept. I burst out of the passage into the western stairwell and nearly fell down the stairs in my haste. My legs felt weak. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, and that warm trickle from my nose had become a steady flow. I was experiencing radiation poisoning symptoms far too quickly. Even at lethal doses, it should take longer than this. Unless something else was happening. Unless this wasn't just about radiation. I made it down 2 flights before I heard them coming from above. Multiple sets of footsteps on the stairs, descending with that same unnatural speed. I looked up and immediately wished I hadn't. They were there, those figures in radiation suits, but now they were crawling down the walls and ceiling like insects, their bodies twisted and contorted in ways that defied physics. Their eyeless faces were all locked on me, and I could see now that their mouths were moving in unison, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. I half ran, half fell down the remaining stairs and crashed through the door into the ground floor corridor. I knew where I was now, about 50 meters from the auxiliary exit, a heavy steel door that led to the exterior service area. If I could just reach it, get outside into the open air, maybe this nightmare would end. Maybe I could flag down a patrol vehicle, get medical attention, wake up and discover this was all some fever dream. But as I sprinted down that corridor, my flashlight revealed something that made my hope crumble. The walls were changing. The peeling paint and cracked concrete were being replaced by something else. Flesh. The walls were becoming organic, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Veins of that same greenish light ran through them, spreading like an infection. The corridor itself was transforming into something living, something that was digesting me as I ran through it. And then I saw her. A woman standing in the middle of the corridor, directly between me and the exit. She wasn't wearing a radiation suit. She was dressed in civilian clothes, a simple dress from the 1980s, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked completely normal, almost mundane, except for one detail. She was standing in a pool of that same dark liquid I'd seen earlier, and as I watched, the liquid was rising up her legs, consuming her slowly from the feet up. "Please," she said, and her voice was different from the others. It was human, terrified, real. "Please help me. I don't want to become like them. I've been trapped here since that night. We all have. Everyone who died, everyone who was exposed. We're all still here. The plant won't let us go." I slowed, my training as a security guard warring with my terror. She looked genuinely frightened, tears streaming down her face. But I'd learned my lesson in the medical station. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my distance. "My name is Anya Kovalenko. I was a technician. I was in Reactor 4 when it happened. I was 23 years old." She held out her hand, and I could see the liquid creeping up past her waist now. "It's consuming all of us, feeding on our memories, our pain. And now it wants you too. You need to understand something, Victor. That night in 1986, what they told the world wasn't the whole truth. Something else happened in Reactor 4. Something they couldn't explain, couldn't control. And it's been growing ever since, feeding on the radiation, on the death, on the fear." The liquid had reached her chest. She was sinking into it, being pulled down by some invisible force. Her voice became more urgent, desperate. "The sealed rooms, don't let them take you there. That's where it's strongest. That's where it shows you things, makes you understand. Once you see, you can never leave. You become part of it, part of the plant's memory, like me, like all of us." "How do I get out?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Tell me how to survive this." Anya's face was disappearing beneath the dark liquid now, only her eyes visible. But in those eyes, I saw something shift. Recognition, understanding, maybe even hope. "The sarcophagus," she whispered, her voice bubbling up through the fluid. The old maintenance tunnel beneath the sarcophagus. It wasn't sealed properly. "You can get through. But hurry. Dawn is when it's weakest. When the sun rises, you might have a chance. Just don't look at what's inside. Don't let it show you the truth." She vanished completely, pulled under the surface. The pool rippled once, twice, then went still. And then, impossibly, it began flowing toward me, spreading across the corridor floor like living shadow. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, away from the auxiliary exit that was now blocked, back into the depths of the facility. Behind me, I heard them all coming. The figures in radiation suits, the voices, the footsteps. They were herding me, I realized with growing horror, pushing me toward a specific destination, toward the one place I'd been told never to go under any circumstances. They were driving me toward Reactor 4 itself, toward the sarcophagus that contained the melted core and all the secrets buried within. I've tried to explain what happened next to psychologists, to doctors, even to a priest once when the nightmares got so bad I couldn't sleep for days. None of them believed me. They said it was radiation-induced psychosis, trauma, hallucinations brought on by fear and exposure. Maybe they're right. Maybe my mind broke that night and created an elaborate fiction to explain the unexplainable. But I was there. I felt it. And I still carry the scars, both the ones you can see and the ones you can't. The route to Reactor 4 took me through sections of the facility I'd never accessed before. Doors that should have been welded shut swung open at my approach. Corridors that had been blocked by debris were suddenly clear, as if the building itself was rearranging to guide me. My dosimeter had gone silent, which terrified me more than when it was screaming. Either the radiation had reached levels beyond what the device could measure, or something had broken the laws of physics so fundamentally that the instrument couldn't process what it was detecting. I could still hear them behind me, that army of figures in radiation suits, their footsteps echoing through the concrete maze. But they weren't catching up anymore. They were maintaining a constant distance, like shepherds guiding livestock. The realization made me want to scream. I wasn't escaping. I was being delivered. The air grew thicker as I descended deeper into the facility. It wasn't just the dust and decay. There was something else, a pressure that made my ears pop and my chest tighten. The temperature dropped so dramatically I could see my breath, white clouds in the beam of my flashlight. Frost was forming on the walls, delicate patterns that looked almost intentional, almost like writing in a language I couldn't read, but somehow understood. They were warnings. Turn back. Don't look. Forget what you've seen. But there was no turning back. The only way out was through. I reached the entrance to the lower maintenance level, a heavy blast door that hung partially open. Beyond it, a metal staircase descended into absolute darkness. My flashlight seemed to die at the threshold, its beam unable to penetrate more than a few feet. I checked the battery. Still full. The darkness wasn't natural. It was something else. Something that swallowed light the way a black hole swallows matter. I had no choice. I started down the stairs, each step an act of will against every survival instinct I possessed. The metal creaked under my weight, and I realized with sick certainty that I was the first person to walk these stairs in 14 years, maybe longer. The dust was undisturbed, except for those same wet footprints I'd seen earlier. They led downward, into the dark, as if showing me the way. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a tunnel. It was wider than I'd expected, tall enough to stand upright, with pipes running along the ceiling that dripped some kind of condensation. But it wasn't water. When I touched a drop, it was warm and thick, almost viscous. I wiped it on my pants and kept moving, following the tunnel as it curved toward the heart of the facility. That's when I started hearing the voices again. But these weren't the urgent shouts of operators trying to control a reactor meltdown. These were different, calmer, more methodical. They were speaking in Russian, discussing technical specifications, radiation levels, containment procedures. I recognized some of the terminology from my training. They were talking about something called Project Lodestar, a designation I'd never heard before. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and I stopped dead. It was a control room, but not like any I'd seen in my patrols of the facility. This one was pristine, maintained, with equipment that looked far too modern for 1986. Computers with digital displays, monitoring stations with screens showing data in real time, banks of switches and dials all glowing with soft amber light. And in the center of it all, a large window looking into an adjacent chamber. Through that window, I could see it. Reactor 4. But not the destroyed, entombed ruin I knew existed. This was something else. Something that existed in a space between moments. Between what was and what could have been. The reactor core was exposed, and it was beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful. It glowed with that same greenish light I'd seen throughout the building. But here it was pure, intense, almost alive. Tendrils of energy spiraled up from the core, reaching toward the ceiling like the arms of some vast, hungry entity. And standing in front of the window, with his back to me, was a man in a lab coat. He was writing something in a notebook, completely calm, as if this were a routine observation. He spoke without turning around, his voice cultured, educated, with a Moscow accent. "You're early, Victor. We weren't expecting anyone until the next cycle. But I suppose the timeline has become fluid lately. The boundary between then and now, between here and there, it's all breaking down. The plant is hungry, you see. It's been feeding for so long, growing stronger, and now it's reaching out, trying to expand beyond this place." I tried to speak, but my throat was closed with fear. The man turned around, and I recognized him from photographs in the facility archives. Dr. Valentin Krylov, chief physicist, killed in the initial explosion. His body had been one of the first recovered, so badly burned that identification had required dental records. But here he was, standing in front of me, looking exactly as he had in life. "You're not real," I managed to whisper. "You're dead. You died in 1986. Dr. Krylov smiled, and it was a sad, tired expression. "Death is a relative concept here, Victor. In this place, at this moment, I'm as real as you are. Perhaps more so. You're still clinging to the illusion that there's a difference between the living and the dead, between past and present. But Project Lodestar proved otherwise. We discovered something in those final moments before the explosion. The reactor wasn't just splitting atoms, it was tearing open something else, something fundamental." He gestured to the glowing core beyond the window. "What you're seeing isn't just nuclear fission, it's a wound in reality itself. And like any wound, it became infected. All the death, all the suffering, all the fear and pain. It fed the infection, made it grow, made it sentient. The plant isn't just a building anymore, Victor. It's a living memory of the disaster, and it's been waiting for someone like you. Someone alive, aware, who could see what really happened. Someone who could carry the truth out into the world." I backed toward the door, but it had sealed shut. Dr. Krylov shook his head, almost sympathetically. "You can't leave yet. You haven't seen the whole truth. That's why you're here. That's why the plant brought you. It needs you to understand, to witness. And then, maybe, it will let you go. Or maybe it will keep you. Like it kept us. Like it keeps everyone who gets too close." He turned back to the window and pointed at the reactor core. "Look closely, Victor. Look at what's really in there. Look at what we created." And God help me, I looked. I stepped forward and pressed my face to the glass, staring into the heart of the ruined reactor. At first, all I could see was the light, that terrible green radiance. But as my eyes adjusted, I began to make out shapes within it. Figures. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all suspended in the energy like insects in amber. They were moving, writhing, reaching out with desperate hands, and I recognized faces, some from photographs, some from the memorial walls in nearby towns. The victims, all of them. Every person who died because of Chernobyl was trapped inside that core, their consciousness preserved, aware, suffering for eternity. And in the center of them all, I saw something else. something that wasn't human, had never been human. It was vast and ancient and hungry, feeding on their pain, growing stronger with each passing moment. It had been here long before the reactor was built, sleeping beneath the earth. And the disaster had woken it, given it form, given it purpose. Dr. Krylov's voice came from behind me, barely audible over the ringing in my ears. Now you understand. Now you've seen the truth. The question is, Victor, what will you do with this knowledge? And more importantly, will it let you leave? The lights in the control room began to flicker. The figures behind the glass turned their faces toward me, their mouths opening in silent screams. And I felt something reaching out from that core, reaching across the space between us, trying to pull me in. When the glass began to tremble beneath my hands, I felt a cold surge of terror, unlike anything I'd ever known. That force, ancient, hungry, and utterly impersonal, seemed to flow through the crystal shield, and for a moment, I was floating inside the green-lit core alongside the thousands of trapped souls, suspended between memory and oblivion. I couldn't hear myself scream. I was drowning in images, sounds, feelings that weren't my own. I saw snapshots from the disaster, firefighters struggling in choking black smoke, engineers shouting desperate orders, a mother cradling a sick child outside Pripyat as the evacuation buses roared by. The collective trauma played on, looping through suffering and fear. For an infinite instant, I felt every death, every regret, every mistake, born of secrecy and pride. It was overwhelming, vast, and suffocating. Then another memory surfaced, one I recognized as my own, though twisted by the plant's will. My father urging me to become a guard for the steady paycheck. "We protect ghosts," he'd joked the night I accepted the job. Now I finally understood. Ghosts weren't metaphorical. They were real, restless, and angry, and I was protected from nothing. With what felt like the last ounce of my fading will, I broke contact with the glass and stumbled backward into Dr. Krylov, who watched me placidly. His eyes, clear as steel, pierced through me. "You are the witness, Victor." The control room dissolved, and I found myself pulled through corridors, faces and voices flickering past, until I was back in the service tunnel, crawling frantically toward any patch of familiar concrete or rusted pipeline. Behind me, the figures in radiation suits followed, their bodies stretched, broken, yet somehow still in motion. At the edge of my vision, liquid shadow poured from the walls, gathering in shapes that whispered and cajoled, tempting me with revelations and promises of power. The pain in my head was splitting. I wanted nothing more than to let go and lose myself in the plant's embrace. Somehow, muscle memory took over. I retraced Anya's warnings, the sealed rooms, the sarcophagus access, the maintenance tunnel. I fumbled with a hatch at the end of the corridor, feeling the obsidian chill of the plant's presence pressing on my back as I pried it open and crawled through, breath burning, blood streaming from my nose. The tunnel beyond was suffocating, but the pressure started to fade as I moved, and the green radiance receded. I crawled for what felt like hours, ignoring every temptation to look back, until my numb hands found a rusted ladder leading upward. My dosimeter was silent now. I hauled myself up in total darkness. I emerged at the edge of the facility, just as the first sickly rays of dawn struck the abandoned cooling towers. Cold, shaking, poisoned, yet miraculously alive, I collapsed onto the frozen ground. The spectral figures melted in the morning light. The building stood silent, its secrets buried, at least for now. As I lay there struggling to breathe, I knew one thing for certain. I would never truly leave Chernobyl behind. The plant had shown me its memory, and I was its witness forever. Sunrise was no liberation, only a temporary reprieve. The entity beneath the ruined core would never be satisfied, and in its tunnels and halls, the lost souls would continue to whisper, hoping another living mind might hear and remember. The night after my escape, I didn't sleep a single second. The images from the reactor core haunted my mind, the faces trapped in that spectral energy, the darkness that pulsed and fed on pain. I was sick, weak, but more than that, I was changed. They say radiation scars the body, but what I carried was an invisible mark on my soul. Days later, back in Kiev, I began receiving letters, typed on old, battered typewriters, unsigned. Each envelope contained a single page describing more secrets of the plant, details about Project Lodestar, cryptic warnings about the growing entity beneath the earth, and most disturbing, a message for me specifically. We are coming for you, Victor. The memory will never forget. Neither should you. The paranoia set in. Shadows moved just beyond my sight. Whispers followed me in empty rooms. I stopped answering my phone. I moved houses twice. Even then, I knew the plant's memory was looking for me, preserving itself through fear and stories, just as it preserved those lost souls in the reactor's core. I often wonder if there's a way to destroy it, to sever the memory it feeds on. But deep down, I fear it's a part of me now, part of all of us who lived in its shadow. My vigilia in that haunted plant wasn't just a night of terror. It was a baptism into a truth no one should ever know. If there's one thing I want anyone who hears my story to understand, it's this. The past never dies. It waits. It remembers. And sometimes it reaches for us in the darkest hours of the night. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of Chernobyl's darkest secrets. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of terror, mystery, and the unseen forces lurking just beyond our reality, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story chilled you the most? Are you brave enough to imagine a night in the exclusion zone? Please leave a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what you want to see next. Remember, there are countless stories like this out there, waiting to be told. And I'll be here, uncovering them one terrifying night at a time. Stay safe and keep your eyes open. Sometimes the past isn't dead, it's just waiting.